pedestrians and little kids at very low speed impacts, sometimes without even moving. A 9-year-old girl right outside of Washington, D.C. on her little bicycle bumped into the rear bumper of a 59 Cadillac, went right into the tail fin, was killed. Suddenly I said to myself, hey, a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old would have looked at those tail fins and hood ornaments and said, they're dangerous. But I was looking at them when I was a kid, hey, that's a Chevy, that's a Plymouth, that's a Buick. And then I said, after I began researching the collision characteristics at various speeds between cars and other cars and motorists and pedestrians, easy to chew, pretty to look at, and that's the food they eat. They didn't learn that from parents or their ethnic background or where they grew up. They learned that by watching Saturday, Sunday TV, those kiddie shows that do more than anything to shape what these kids demand from their parents. The whole purpose of these ads is to goad and nag the parents. In fact, the copywriters who make these ads on the children's program score them, and if they are terrific, they say, this ad has a high nag factor. In other words, a lot of the kids are going to nag their parents after watching it. And no other place do we grow up corporate than when we don't even make a political issue out of what we own but don't control. We own 1/3 of America, the public lands where all the minerals are, and the mining companies pretty much control it through their friends in Washington. I mean, you've heard about the 1872 Mining Act, where a molybdenum company or a gold company go on federal land, discover the mine, and then they buy the land over the mine for $5 or less per acre. That was the price in 1872 from the U.S. government. And then they dig the gold and they mine the molybdenum, and it's free. They sell it, they deduct their expenses, they keep the profits. The taxpayers, the government gets nothing, no royalties. And you heard about this Canadian gold mine company which just bought $8 billion worth of gold in Nevada for $20,000 under the 1872 Mining Act. That's our land. We own the airwaves, we don't control it. We own $3 trillion of pension funds, we don't control them. We own $1.5 trillion of mutual insurance money, Prudential, Metropolitan. We're talking legally now. We're the legal owners. Don't have a snip of control. The corporations control. And when you grow up corporate, you don't even make it an issue. You don't even think about it. I went through all kinds of courses at college, never mentioned once in our economics courses. Went through law school, never mentioned once this bit between what we own and what we don't control of what we own. Do you think that's by accident? I mean, all these professors are extremely bright. If you didn't believe them, you just asked them. Do you think it's by accident that they take trillions of dollars of public assets owned by the people in this country and controlled by a few giant corporations in collaboration with their government minions, like the Department of Interior? And they never talk about it? They never write about it? They never discuss it? They never give us readings about it? That's what I mean by growing up corporate. And when we grow up corporate, let me tell you, we don't need the police at the door at 4 a.m. in the morning. We do it for them. And I think a lot of what's going on in this union in terms of its emphasis on history and culture is basically to root what you're all about in a broader framework and insulate this constant hammering and curtailment of people's horizons by the corporate commercial standards. You know, in the last 15, 20 years, these corporatists and their think tanks have been rewriting history. Rewriting history. They've been saying that trade unions have destroyed our competitiveness in the world, That's a nice word, isn't it? Competitiveness. What that means is, hurry up, America. You haven't reached the level of Malaysia yet. It means pull down your standards of living. Pull down your standards of living. Take away your right to jury trials and injury cases. Freeze your minimum wage and have it eroded by inflation. Bust up the unions. Intimidate workers who want to form them. Have a regressive tax system. Let the schools go to hell. Build more gambling casinos, more entertainment palaces. The Roman circus, feed it to them. It'll numb them from what's happening, which is the global corporate world order is to pull down higher standard of living countries like ours to lower standard of living countries. That's what meeting the global competition means. And it's happening. It's no longer a prediction. You've read the figures on declining real income. You felt it in your own bargaining sessions. But it's happening across the board. We're becoming increasingly a nation that is giving up its industrial base, a nation that is more and more viewed as a service economy, and that is going to be going with global computerization. Already there are companies, this I didn't even believe, but I heard it at a major conference in Washington by one of the union executives from New York in the healthcare industry. But if this is happening now, you can imagine what's happening. There are major hospitals that are in China now teaching Chinese workers just the computer, how to operate the alphabet. They don't even have to learn English. And they're working accounting and other data and transferring them overnight to the U.S. Now, we know that the airlines have done this for years with workers in the Bahamas. We know that some of the biotech industries are now doing it in India with English-speaking college graduates. But to do it via the hospital, and sure, even the service jobs now are increasingly jeopardized. So you might ask, well, what's keeping the economy up? I mean, by now it should have collapsed. A lot of what's keeping the economy up is the failure of the economy, which produces economic demands. For instance, more and more of our economic activity is going to meet the failures of our society. The good, easy example of that is when they started putting phony bumpers on cars. Well, a bumper is supposed to protect the fender in low-speed impacts. Well, they start putting phony bumpers, then that created an industry to create bumper guards, to put on bumpers, to protect the bumper. And of course, since they didn't do a very good job, cars would have $600, $800, $900 worth of damage at 4 or 5 mile an hour fender bender collisions. So that kept a lot of body shops going, a lot of insurance agents and adjusters going. The more crime there is in corporate area, the more bookkeepers, the more accountants, the more investigators, unfortunately not the more prosecutors. The more people get sick because of their working conditions or poverty conditions, the more health workers. In short, this economy is not an economy that's moving to meet needs that are basic. It's moving to meet needs that arise out of the injustice in our society.
You're listening to Ralph Nader on Corporate Power, Profits Before People, Part 1. This is Alternative Radio. Stay tuned at the end for information on how you can get a copy of this program.
Broadcasting from the University of Washington, you're listening to 94.9 Public Radio, KUOW, Seattle. The time is 12:30.
Whenever you have, say, corruption in the insurance and banking industry, those are job creators. More and more, what we're seeing in our country are problems that could be avoided, and because they're not avoided, they create the demand for economic activity. But let me tell you, we spend $70 billion a year cleaning up after traffic crashes. Deaths, injuries, repairs, hospital, etc. There's a lot of other things we'd like to spend $70 billion a year on. We could spend $70 billion a year on adult education, sabbaticals for workers. We could spend $70 billion a year on a lot of things that lift up the standard of living rather than keep repairing the corrosions and the injustices that we shouldn't have to face. So this is not an economy that moves from feeding everybody, clothing everybody, housing everybody, educating everybody, and then raising the sights of what we do in our life. This is an economy that's increasingly giving a bigger and bigger share of its GNP to problems that we shouldn't even have in the first place. Here's one of my favorite examples. You got these Nestle and other corporations producing infant formula, and over the years doing everything they can to discourage breastfeeding. They're doing it psychologically, they're doing it through fear, they're doing it right at the birthplace in the hospital with the infant formula gratis of the infant formula companies. And then the young mothers go to infant formula, and then the drug companies come along and they say, oh, look what we have for you. It's called lactation suppressant drug. We're going to sell you a drug to suppress the milk that you would otherwise produce. So they create the market through the infant formula when pediatric science says that nothing can compare to mother's milk. There are certain cases where a mother can't, but in the most part, mother's milk is, shall we say, the indicated food. They create the market, then they create a need, lactation suppressant, then the drugs come, and then the women start dying. They start going into shock. There are all kinds of side effects for this lactation suppressant drug. And then the women have to go to the hospitals and be treated by doctors, hospitals, and other drug companies. And all that increases the gross national product. That's what I mean. Unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, our health research group under Sidney Wolf filed a legal action against the Food and Drug Administration to take this off the market, and Sandoz Corporation, a Swiss firm, announced 2 days later it was taking the lactation suppressant drug off the market. And now we'll get it off all over the world. But you see how they create their own demand. And look at how much people suffer, including the little children. Well, the scene in Washington, our president, George Ronald Clinton, promised you during his campaign, like he promised us in the consumer movement, that he was going to become a champion of our causes. And I took that with a grain of Arkansas salt, because I had been observing his knuckling under to Arkansas corporations ever since he was reelected after he was defeated in the early 80s. I guess he made a decision he was never going to lose another election on principle again. So he got inaugurated after his election, and the question was, clearly now the minimum wage will be increased. You remember, it was at $3.35 per hour from 1981 to 89, during which time members of Congress doubled their pay. Doubled their pay. Not to mention their pensions and everything else. They froze the minimum wage. I guess there were 7 million workers at that level then. Now it's up to $4.25 federal. If it was adjusted for inflation, it would, just in the last 20 years, it would be close to $7 an hour. Now, this is what's really interesting. You talk to the White House people, as I have, and they said, oh, that's irrelevant now because we have the earned income credit. The earned income credit. Now, you must know what a small percentage of people either know or can qualify for the earned income credit, earned income tax credit. You know where the minimum wage is now on his legislative priority? It isn't even observable. No one's talking about it. The Secretary of Labor, the White House, the Democrats in Congress, it is gone, period. It's not even on the agenda. Now, one would think there'd be labor demonstrations on this. No labor demonstrations. The next thing was labor law reform. Can't form an industrial union hardly anymore with the NLRB the way it is. You read that book, Which Side Are You On? It came out from that labor lawyer in Chicago. He painted the picture very clearly. Workers who try to organize unions, they're fired, and then 3.5 years to get through the NLRB, and then no punitive damages. The best they can do is to get back wages. Not a very encouraging sign to the workers who come after them once the first wave are fired. Where's labor law reform? Labor law reform now is a proposal to ban striker replacement. Well, of course, if you have temporary scabs, that's a pretty good option for the employers. Striker replacement was up. This is a Democratic Congress, Democratic president. I've had 3 labor union chiefs tell me privately that they didn't think Clinton raised a finger, other than just to go through the rhetoric, when that was up before Congress a few weeks ago. In the Senate, it's gone, dead in the water. They couldn't shut off the filibuster. They had about 56 votes. They needed 60 to shut off the filibuster, led by the Republicans and some Southern Democrats, who we call crypto Republicans. Now, what about the labor laws generally? Well, there's a Labor Law Commission. Here we go again. 2 guesses as to who chaired it. Mr. Diebold. Every time there's a Labor Law Commission, he comes down and he chairs it from Cambridge, Massachusetts. He is part of the industrial labor bureaucracy cabal. You know, like Shapiro of DuPont and some of their labor friends in Washington used to sit around and talk about collaboration and cooperation in these kinds of advisory meetings. We had a nationwide big business day in 1980. It was like a national teach-in on campuses, exploring the abuses of big business. A reporter from one of the newspaper chains calls me up, and he says, I just finished talking to Harold Shapiro, the CEO of DuPont. And he was against, obviously, Big Business Day. And I said, well, what did he tell you? He said, well, that Nader crowd, they're marginalized. If you want to find out the truth about Big Business Day, why don't you call up the head of the AFL-CIO, my friend. This is the head of DuPont telling a reporter to call up the head of the AFL-CIO because they both agreed that this was a foolish exercise. Well, labor law reform. The whole labor law has got to be reformed. It's been undermined and overridden by bad appointments, by the union-busting strategies. It's obsolete. It's not keeping up with the new counterattack. It's not even keeping up with Canada. I mean, Canada, look how easy it is in the petition drive compared to here. In terms of the so-called elections and what you can do and what you can't do and what the employer can get away with. I mean, there is a reason why Canadian workers are, 33, 34, 36% of them are in trade unions. And what are we down to here now? 14%, 11% in industrial sector, projected to be 7% by the year 2001 if nothing changes. It's dwindling away. White House, labor law reform. I was meeting with one of Clinton's staffs the other day. I said, what about labor law reform? He could hardly restrain from a wry smile. It's not even on the screen. Well, the other two priorities for the National Labor Organization was health care and trade. Look what they got for health care. They jumped on the Clinton bandwagon pretty early. And where's that bandwagon now? It's like that guy who said, look out for the cliff. And the other guy said, what cliff? It's gone. It's gone. Why didn't they get on single payer before this massive merger movement took hold? And now makes it very difficult, as Tony describes, makes it very difficult for even single payer to work. If you have a single payer and you have 5 giant hospital chains owning 1,000 hospitals, it's going to be hard for the accountability mechanism of single payer to work with such monopolies or such oligopolies. And here's the antitrust division of Clinton, which was supposed to revive the antitrust laws. And when was the last time they said no in the last 16 months to a major merger? They said no to a couple telecommunications. But look at them every week. Every merger is followed by mass layoffs. Now you got Lockheed Martin, Marietta. If that doesn't restrict competition for the Defense Department, what in the world would? One company left for all those Pentagon contracts? The kind of contracts where they rounded out to the nearest $100 million. There are hospital chains now bragging that in mid-sized cities, they're going to control the whole market. Cities the size of Knoxville or Mobile or whatever. These mergers are, not just 2 hospitals merging. You're talking about chains with 80 hospitals and 70 hospitals merging. Now you've got the hospitals and the drug companies and the HMO conglomerates and the insurance companies coming in like this with one another. The insurance companies are buying up the HMOs and doctor practices. The drug companies are buying up the drug prescription and generic drug companies. And the hospital chains are trying to buy up anything they can. Now, why didn't organized labor in Washington go for the single payer? Well, their reason is it didn't have a chance. Well, I always like that, It's like someone saying, it doesn't have a chance, therefore I am not going to give it a chance. And when you're a big player, you're a self-fulfilling prophecy. First of all, it starts out with 93 members of the House behind it. Up until Clinton sent his bill, and even later, last fall, no health care bill in Congress had more lawmakers signed on than the single payer, led by Congressman Jim McDermott from Washington State, who's an MD. It's not a bad start. You go to the White House last year and you talk to Ira Magaziner and others, working on health care. You want to know something? 80% of these people are private single-payer advocates. They're all. Donna Shalala, she's a single-payer advocate. Hillary Clinton is said to be a single-payer advocate. I mean, who else do you need? You could, if the AFL secretly or privately say they'd prefer single-payer, and they got a lot of their union members single-payer already declared like you are, and the head of HHS and the staff and the First Lady and thousands of doctors beginning to sign on to single payer, and all the evidence of how it works and how much more efficient it is. And you got the neighbor to the north, even with its budgetary problems in Ottawa, bleeding the provinces in terms of the health care budget. They still have a health care system that towers in terms of its accessibility and its affordability over ours, and gets 95% approval by the people who are serviced by it. It's not all that different a country. What more do you need? Oh, it doesn't have a chance. Well, now what has a chance? You get the public all riled up on health care reform. It's hard to do that more than once or twice a decade. They blew the opportunity. One reason the Clintonites blew the opportunity is they don't know who they are. They're like a little pendulum. And if the medical, hospital, and drug industry lobbies, insurance company lobbies push them, they go. They don't know who they are. They didn't draw a line. They didn't dig their heels in. They're just like a fan in the wind. And once these companies sense that, it's all over. They know that Clinton wasn't going to fight. He kept compromising. He kept bending. I mean, he even basically said, I'm not going to veto a bill that doesn't have universal coverage phased in. And pretty soon you say, hey, you know who won the election? I'll tell you who won the election. Dole, Hatch, and Gingrich. Hatch says, I don't like your nominee for the Supreme Court that they're talking about in the press, the Secretary of Interior, Bruce Babbitt, and Clinton backs off. Another name is floated, and Hatch says he doesn't like it. Clinton backs off. Then he picks Steve Breyer, who's got views on health and safety regulation that are charitably described as idiotically abstract, or less charitably described as corporatist to the core. And here he had a chance to recast the Supreme Court. He's already had two. He'll probably have two more. If he goes 8 years, he'll have 3 more. And look who he's picking. People, when he nominates them, are instantly praised by the Wall Street Journal, Forbes magazine, Robert Dole, Strom Thurmond, and Robert Bork. You know, for this, what do you need an election for? No wonder the none of the above movement is catching on in this country. People are tired of Tweedledee, Tweedledum. Now we come to OSHA, the OSHA bill. When Clinton was elected, we were assured this bill is going to really start moving. Kennedy's people thought that. People in the House thought that. Hasn't moved. These are the amendments to strengthen OSHA, you know about. Hasn't moved. Now, you and I could give a dozen other examples that point to the same conclusion. What are the Democrat Party partisans doing to make this a two-party system? They seem to be doing everything to make it a one-party system with two faces. A distinction without a difference. There is no longer a two-party system. Common Cause did a study of the House of Representative races in 1990-92. And they said 10% are competitive. That is, 10% had an opponent on the other side of the ballot with a reasonable kit of money. 90% of the races either had no opposing candidate from the major party, 72 races, or they had nominal opponents with a kitty of less than $50,000. Two-party system? Where's the two-party system? They don't even go through the motions anymore. They concede one district to each other. My home state of Connecticut is an example. The 6th district is conceded by the Democrats to the Republicans, And the first district around Hartford is conceded to the Democrats by the Republicans. And they carve up the country that way. And then they fight it out in 10% of the races. Now, do you know how much of our promise of our democracy is built on this myth, the two-party system? That's the only credibility politics has, because that means we're supposed to have a choice. We don't have a choice. Labor Party advocates is precisely the way to go, because it basically says we're not... It basically says we as working people are not going to get going until we know where we're going, how we're going, and when we're going. Then you got something really substantial. It's pretty easy to say to millions of Americans, we need a new party. We need new parties. And they'll all support it in great numbers. Great numbers. But if that's all they do, they don't roll up their sleeves, they don't work out an agenda, they don't develop the kind of society we want to build, well, it doesn't go anywhere. So basically what Labor Party advocates does in its meetings around the country, it says to working people and families, you want to have a new option? What do you want it to do? You want it to be a powerful movement without candidates? You want it later on to be a powerful movement with candidates? You want it to have its own media? You want it to have its own civic curriculum that the school children can learn, as some of you are doing with, I'm happy to say, with our Civics for Democracy book in the schools? You know, just 10% of our time as active citizens will revolutionize our society. 10% of our time. I'm talking about waking and sleeping time. Waking and sleeping time. I mean, what is that? 2.4 hours a day, which is 16 or so hours a week. And it's happy time, not with drinks. When you're working in a community, when you're going after injustice, when you're building a future for your children, when you're making work productive and escalating rather than dead end, that's happiness. Citizen time's not a drag, however important it is. We'd rather be doing something else. It's a formula for happiness. When you see certain parts of our cities where neighborhoods organize and mobilize and make their neighborhood and their schools and their streets and make City Hall pay more attention to them, that's improving their standard of living like nothing else can. And yet, no movement does it that basically. Most political movements do this. They find a little manifesto, and then they find some leaders, and then they throw their hat in the ring, and they get 1/10 of 1% of the national vote. And what LPA is trying to do, they come out of mass movements with an agenda. They're very, very less likely to double-cross you. Whereas now, even when you get well-intentioned politicians and they get elected by progressive-minded people and they go to Washington and you begin wondering, why are they voting this way? One reason they're voting this way is they're being hammered by the special interest groups to do that. But the other reason is that they don't feel they have a base back home when they're cut off at the pass in Washington. They're not coming out of a mass movement. They're trying to appeal to mass of people. It's quite different than coming out of a mass movement with an explicit agenda where even if they're in the minority in the early years and they go down fighting in Congress, they're not going to pay an electoral penalty. If anything, they'll be considered heroic when they go back home. Now there's so many people who go to Washington, try to do the right thing, and they catch hell when they go back home. Because the radio and the TV and the newspapers are giving their spin on it. because the people have their own media, because the Chamber of Commerce is painting this good legislator as a job destroyer or whatever. And they don't have any opportunity to connect. So I want you to, from an outside point of view, I just wanted you to hear that the strategy of LPA is extremely fundamental and sophisticated. For people who are very impatient, it may be considered too deliberate, not fast enough. But you have the lessons of recent history. You remember the Citizens Party in 1980. It had two organizers. That was when Barry Commoner was running with Donna Harris, and very progressive agenda. It got 270,000 votes. The Libertarian Party got 1 million votes. That's top down. This has got to be bottom up.
That was Ralph Nader on Corporate Power, Profits Before People, Part 1. He spoke at the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union Convention in Denver, Colorado on September 1st, 1994. Ralph Nader, founder of Public Citizen, is a longtime advocate for consumer safety and workers' rights. This program is produced by Alternative Radio, which each week presents perspectives and analyses ignored or distorted by the mainstream media. Featured speakers include Barbara Ehrenreich, Philip Agee, Ron Daniels, Noam Chomsky, Mab Segrist, and many others. For information on ordering copies of Ralph Nader on Corporate Power, Profits Before People, call 1-800-444-1977. Again, that number is 1-800-444-1977. Printed transcripts of this program are $7. Cassettes of both parts are $22. Please send your check to Alternative Radio, 2129 Mapleton, Boulder, Colorado, 80304. Again, printed transcripts are $7, and for $22 you can get both cassettes. Send your check to Alternative Radio, 2129 Mapleton, Boulder, Colorado, 80304. And thanks for listening on WMNF in Tampa, Florida, KAJX in Aspen, Colorado, and CIUT in Toronto, Canada. Your support makes the program possible. I'm David Barsamian. Thanks very much.